Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Recruit Military Live, a continuing series of live broadcasts covering all things military transition, veteran employment, mil-spouse employment, and much, much more. My name is Lucas Conley, retired U.S. Army officer, former TAP program manager, and your host today, here to share with you the ins and outs of making the move from military to civilian employment. If you're in search of meaningful employment opportunities, well, you're in the right place. Please visit rmvets.com/live to learn more. According to the Department of Defense, an average of 1,300 service members hang up their uniforms every day. Yes, every day, and head out into the civilian sector. For many folks, that means the challenges of relocating, of finding a new career, of adjusting their budgets, adjusting their lives and the way they think about their relationships. And then, of course, adjusting to the norms of civilian life. But this process doesn't have to be something to fear or something to be seen as an obstacle or just something to survive, but it can be an opportunity to thrive. Our guest today is going to be sharing with us a few tips on making your transition less of a stumbling block and more of an opportunity to excel. Our guest today started her career as a paralegal specialist and a paratrooper at Fort Bragg's mighty 82nd Airborne Division. She went on to be commissioned as an officer and to serve as a Medevac pilot before separating from the service in 1988. Since hanging up her flight suit, she's gone on to be a sales director, community leader, a veteran advocate, a Maxwell Leadership Program leader, and most recently the president and CEO of the Leader Transition Institute, where she helps prepare service members, veterans, and their spouses to live lives that they design and choose, not just what's happening to them. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming to Recruit Military Live, Ms. Annie Brock.
Hey, Thank you, Lucas. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me today. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we are honored to have you, and we can't wait to hear all the great tips and wisdom that you've gathered over the years. All right, folks out there in LinkedIn land and Facebook as well, now that you know who we are, we'd like to hear from you. Who are you? Who you with? Who'd you serve with? What's your status? Are you National Guard, Reserve, retired, active duty, getting ready to transition, a mil-spouse or a caregiver, some other status that I haven't thought up yet? Jump into the chat with your comments, questions, concerns, and time allowing, we will address them. All right, Annie, before we get started, why don't you do us a favor and tell us a little bit about yourself, your military transition, and what you've had going on since then.
Well, thanks. I'd love to. So I was a military child. I've had a military ID card for the better part of 65 years now. I'm dating myself, I know, but it's my experience that makes the difference for what we do. My father served in World War II, Korea, and then was a trainer in the Special Forces Q course when he retired. So the big place where I remember growing up as a military base was Fort Bragg. So that's how I ended up back there. When the recruiter asked me in January of 1979 in my contract, where did I want to be assigned? I chose a place that I knew.
Well, while we're on that topic, I'm going to jump right in here. That is a perfect segue. Tell us what we're looking at here in this black and white photo.
Well, you're seeing the backside of a guy named Major Ed Jackson, and he was the executive officer of what was then the 407th Supply and Service Battalion of the 82nd Airborne Division, and he was helping me get rigged up to go on the first all-female parachute jump. And when I say all-female, it's not what people think of now, because when people think of an all-female jump now, they think about having female pilots and female air crew. But we had all women jumpers. We had women jump masters. The safeties were men because they weren't exiting the aircraft. That was the first time that there were enough women to have a parachute jump and have female jump masters. So that was in the very early 80s at Fort Bragg. That picture's taken on Green Ramp.
I only ever got 10 jumps under my belt before I hung up my risers. So I am absolutely in awe of this, and you have gained, if you hadn't had it already, you've most certainly gained my respect once more over. So, folks, we've got a genuine bad mamma jamma on the stage here today. Pay attention. All right, let's jump back. Please continue, Annie.
So I spent about 4 years in the 82nd. Didn't know what I was going to do. I was an enlisted soldier. Had a college degree before I went on active duty, but didn't have enough self-confidence to go through officer candidate school. And so coming up on the end of my enlistment, nothing, no plans, no ideas. There weren't any transition programs. Nobody, wasn't like something that even crossed my mind until the very end. And then I begged, can I stay on active duty, please? Because I don't know what else to do.
There's a lot of that going around.
So, yeah, it's
Guilty.
amazing how what's happening now with people is not anything new. It's been going on for probably the whole history of all the military services. And so I at that point, then after they extended my enlistment, they sat me down and they said, okay, it's time that you got serious. And they talked to me about becoming an officer. And I put in my packet for a direct commission to the Quartermaster Corps, because they thought coming out of the Quartermaster Battalion, I'd be a shoo-in, although I'm not sure why, because I had been the battalion legal clerk. But at any rate, I got turned down. Unbeknownst to me, back when things were on paper, the commander of the medical battalion in the 82nd got a hold of a copy of my paperwork and walked to the Army's Medical Service Corps. And once I had gotten turned down for the quartermaster commission, then I had gotten accepted right away. They had taken my paperwork to officer candidate school, and I had that slot. My commander decided, well, all officers in the 82nd went to jumpmaster school, so they sent me to jumpmaster school so that I'd have that under my belt by the time I got to OCS. Got home from jumpmaster school one day, found a letter in the mail saying, welcome to the Medical Service Corps. And that was the first I knew that I was being considered for a direct commission in another branch. So I went to my battalion commander the next day and said, I don't think I need to go to OCS anymore.
I swear at HRC, there's a room with a giant dartboard, and they're just like, all right, who we got? Brock. What did it hit? Medical service. Beautiful. She'll be great.
It gets better, Lucas, because in my OBC class in San Antonio, they came in one day and they said, who wanted to go to jump school? Well, I had senior jump wings. I didn't need to do that. They said, who wanted to go to air assault school? And I knew that I didn't want to do that. That seemed like too much work. And then they said, well, who wanted to go to flight school? And I thought, well, I could drive a car. Somebody can teach me to drive an airplane or a helicopter. Whoops. And I just lost an earbud. And so I raised my hand, and out of the 5 of us from my class, I was the only one who passed the physical, the tests, and the interview. So I became a Medevac helicopter pilot, and flew Hueys and Blackhawks. My last assignment was at the heliport adjacent to the Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Landstuhl, Germany. And then my last 10 months on active duty was actually on the staff, the administrative staff at the medical center. I went from there to being an Air Force spouse. And so my husband retired in 2007, and here I am.
An amazingly diverse career. I could not have put together a story like that if I tried. So today we're speaking with folks of a variety of caliber. Some folks are getting ready to retire. Some folks have already retired. Some folks are in transition. Some are spouses, mil spouses. When we start to talk about military transitions, that process of deciding, of planning, of considering, well, at what point in time do we really need to start, as of an active duty service member, at what point in time in their career do they need to dig in and start laying down their plans for transition?
This is going to surprise a bunch of people. The day after they graduate from basic training or their officer basic course, that's the day you start planning for your transition. Some people don't like it when I say this, but I'm going to say something that's really hard. All of the military services are really good about helping us plan to leave the military in a box. They make sure all of our paperwork is in order.
True.
But the number of us that do that are very slim. Most of us go on to live much longer lives than we ever spent in the military. We spend sometimes, we're alive for twice as many years. Even if we spend a 20-year career, we've got another 40 years or more in the civilian sector. And so I encourage everybody to start that transition process immediately.
Yeah, absolutely.
If there's nothing else, I think that if everybody learned how to do a resume when they first got started, and then after each assignment, they added a couple bullets to their resume, they'd be light years ahead by the time they got out, whether that's at the 5-year point, the 10, or the 25-year point.
It's almost like a living, some people treat their resume like almost like a journal. It's like a running record of your accomplishments throughout your career. Just, hey, I just accomplished something fantastic, or I just got back the numbers for my last year working on a particular program. Let me get that down on paper so that when I need it, I have it available.
We've heard of I Love Me walls where people put up all their awards and those kinds of things. People need to, in today's world, they need to have an I Love Me folder on their device and put copies of every single evaluation report they get, every single award they're nominated for, notes from projects that they've done, all of those kinds of things. It's the same thing I actually tell 7th and 8th graders to do when they get to high school. You start that in 9th grade so that by the time you're ready to do your college applications in your senior year, you don't have to go scrambling for pieces of paper to say, what did I do for the last 4 years? The same thing in a military career. Keep all of that stuff in one place, because you'd be surprised how many people, when I am helping them with their resume or their LinkedIn profile, have to go digging and digging to find things. Yay, good for you.
I have it right here.
Exactly what you even call it, the right thing, the I Love Me book.
It's pretty thick. There's a lot of stuff in there, a lot of lies about how great I was.
But that it gives you the words to put in to your resume and reminds you about things that you did that you might have forgotten about.
The other thing I often recommend people do is, I think it's a Form SF-29. It's the document you have to fill out, the lengthy, painful document you have to fill out when it comes time to renew your security clearance. And you put in addresses and phone numbers and people that knew you when you were stationed at Fort wherever. Get a print copy of that before it goes to S2, because some of that information can be hard to come by. And if you're not as organized as I am, or people that are more organized than me, for God's sake, that can be a valuable piece of documentation, especially if you're looking for a reference from a job that you had 10 years prior.
If you're filling out a federal application, they ask for your supervisors' names.
Yep.
Who knows their supervisors' names? Maybe you don't need know their phone number because they've moved on, but I think it's valuable to be able to come up with your supervisor's name.
And luckily, LinkedIn is around now, so it's a little easier to find people. Now,
Yes.
For many people, a lot of folks come into the military right out of high school. Thank you, Chris Pasquale. I want to give you credit for you live on the show. Chris says it's
the right phone number.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Chris. It's just proof that my memory is failing me each year that goes by. Going into the military often is a huge change culturally for pretty much anybody to go from civilian life into military life. The military then shapes you, coaches you, teaches you, mentors you, trains you to be an officer, an NCO, or a great rifleman, or a great logistician, an intel analyst. And then that becomes almost your entire all-encompassing identity of who you are. Your leadership values are laid down in a field manual. The expected normative behaviors, what you should be doing on and off duty. It becomes your whole world. It's easy for many people as they hit that transition point to completely lose themselves. I'm not a jump master anymore. I'm not a Green Beret. I'm not a pilot. What am I? How do you process that?
It's hard. It's hard because our whole identity is wrapped up in that. I mean, I had that slammed in my face when I went to my officer basic course. I had been in the 82nd and I didn't wear a skirt and I bloused my pants in my boots. But the Army reg said that if you were going to a non-jump assignment, that you couldn't do that anymore. I didn't pay attention to that. And what I honestly know is that if I had been a guy, nobody would have noticed. But people said, why is this second lieutenant blousing her pants? And they looked it up, they shoved the reg in my face, and I had to go back to taking off my boots and wearing regular shoes. But I was so wrapped up in who I was. And so, I totally understand how people are wrapped up in their roles because I did that from personal experience and then also as a pilot. It is very hard to get to the core of who we are because even with our families, we don't typically let down out of that because we're so enmeshed in our military life. It absorbs every bit of it. And it's part of the reason why I say that transition is a team sport because our families transition with us. And so it takes some time of dedicated thought. the program, and we'll talk about it later, Changing Focus, that LTI provides, we spend an entire day talking with people about who they are.
Right.
I've had people say, well, you could do that in 90 minutes. No, you can't.
No.
You can start to unpack it. And I'm willing to say, even after the whole day, for some people, it's not really unpacked. And just events start processes within us. And so I look at it as the start of a process in people to really think about who they are. And over that time period that people spend with us, it's the hardest day because they're thinking about who they are and asking themselves questions about what do I really like? Who am I as an individual? But that's what's key to developing a future for themselves where they can thrive.
So you're leaving behind one identity. You're taking with you a new title, veteran. And then looking out of this brave new world where your path is no longer laid down by Human Resources Command as the correct career path. I started off, I was a rifleman, then I was a team leader, then I went from team leader to a weapons sergeant, then I went from weapons sergeant to squad leader, from squad leader to platoon sergeant to master sergeant in the ops section. I became a first sergeant, then I'm thinking about being a sergeant mate, and it's all kind of laid out there. There's not a lot of creativity unless, like you change career paths multiple times, doing something more interesting and harder and more exciting every time. How in the name of God do you chart a career path in the absence of a career, in the absence of direction, in the absence of any guidance from anybody who's an advocate? No retention NCO, no sergeant major to give you advice, no mentor. Honestly, I was lost. I was completely lost.
And I didn't have anybody help me do that either. So I totally understand. And what I have learned along the way is the value of informational interviews. Number one, it's important to know who you are and to think about all these different things that you've done in the military. When I was an officer, I was an admin officer at one point. I was the security officer, the physical security officer. I was the supply officer. I was the training officer. Think about all the different roles that you've had, because that's one of those things in the military. We get all those ancillary roles, whether we're enlisted or officer, that we fill at some time or another. And so we get to explore things. Think about those different things, those different roles that you had, and what did you enjoy most about them? What made your heart sing about that role? And then I want people to throw away the idea of what people expect for them to do because they achieved a certain rank or a certain position in the military. This next part of your life is about you and about what you want to do, what will make your heart sing as you go forward. And as much as I encourage people to go after companies and positions that they feel like they could spend 2 or 3 years in when they leave the military, it's very important to understand it's okay, just like our LTI hashtag says, zigzags and pivots. Be willing to do something that you think is outside of your lane. Be willing to make a zigzag and pivot 180 degrees out from what you have been doing. This is an opportunity. If you have financially set yourself up in a good place, you can have an opportunity to do some trial runs. And perhaps that some of that is as you are, if you've started early in your last couple of years, maybe you can volunteer with some organizations that have opportunities where you can explore some different kinds of roles. And that means also, you don't, if you're going to go after a skill bridge, some kind of an internship, don't necessarily go after your dream job.
Right.
Go after something that's a little different, because you're still going to get the experience in the corporate sector and get an opportunity to learn something different.
There's so many different, you have to explore. And I think this goes back to the point where you said you have to be thinking about this from day one in the uniform, because, unless something very terrible happens to you, you're eventually upright and aware of your surroundings, going to be leaving the military behind. So you got to have a plan. You can't just, like you said, if you've got to explore the whole bold, strange, broad new world of civilian employment from zero understanding of what's out there, that process is going to take time.
Yeah, and what I will say is, in the informational interviews that you do with people, very often people want to know, what is it that you do? I think the more valuable question is, how did you get there? What was your path?
And you know what? And I've told people that before. I said, in your MOS right now, if, in your specialty in the military, you could very easily look at a command sergeant major or a colonel and backwards engineer that person's role, that person's career. And it's pretty set, right? So if you have an aspiration to be an EVP at a manufacturing company or a marketing director at a multimedia company, find somebody like that in LinkedIn, and then go and look at their experiences from where they are now to how they started. And that, if that's a path you want to pursue, well, you've got a blueprint laid out in front of you.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that always think about is that you're looking at people who are perhaps where you want to be, and they did certain things to get there. And so sometimes we have to ask ourselves, we've worked hard during our military career. Are we looking for something where we're willing to work just as hard to get where we want to be? Or are we looking for something where we can just kind of coast along, at least for the first few years?
Happiness,
because there really is nothing wrong with coasting along for the first few years if you can find a position that has a salary that you can afford.
And I would say that happiness and a high salary do not necessarily go hand in hand.
That's exactly right.
There's a lot of very well-paid people out there that are miserable.
Exactly. And so you ask these informational interviews, you ask not only what was your path and what do you do, what is your quality of life? How much time do you spend with your family? All of those kinds of questions that are so important to living life, not just going through life.
Yeah. Hey, if you want to leave the fast pace of being in the military and go out and work 80-hour weeks, somebody will hire you and they'll give you a nice fat paycheck to do it. If now's the time to dial back, downshift, and spend time with the family you've ignored for the last 2 decades, I want to reconsider your objectives. Now, one of the things that I think some people get challenged with as they transition to the civilian life is they're not just changing careers, they're changing cultures.
Yes.
I think everybody who's been in uniform or has ever been adjusted by a drill instructor understands what a knife hand is. Knife hand is a tool used to gather someone's attention very rapidly, hold it for as long as you need to make your point, and to ensure that each syllable is firmly understood. It's usually within 1 or 2 inches of your eyes. It definitely captures your attention and allows the wielder to communicate effectively. There's no place in the civilian world for the knife hand. All right, to all my former drill sergeants out there, first sergeants and sergeant majors, keep the knife hand away. You've got to adjust the way that you communicate, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to build relationships. So other than putting this away, what do our transitioning service members need to understand about the need for effective, constructive communication out there in the civilian world?
In the military, that knife hand, that's the tool that's used to connect with people. When that hand is out, that's the connection that's going on. And there is no effort by the person using that hand to do any more connecting. They don't care what the other person thinks on the other side. They have their message and they're going to get their message across. Now, that doesn't work with our families. It doesn't work with our families when we're in the military, and it doesn't work with anyone outside of the military. What the most important thing that we need to understand in communicating with people is that we can't communicate with people if we don't understand the person with whom we're trying to communicate. Because we have to communicate in a way that they can receive it well. For example, you and I are pretty fast-paced. We can make a decision and spin on a dime.
I tried
That
to.
we are the very small percentage of people in the world. Over 85% of people in the world are slower paced. They're more considerate in making their decisions. And when I say considerate, it takes them a longer time to make their decisions. They speak more slowly. And so when you are communicating, you need to understand who the other person is on the other side. In these scenarios, I continue to speak more quickly because we don't have all day to have a conversation. But when I'm talking with a group of people that processes things in a much slower manner, not because they're mentally slower, but just because that is their natural personality style, I have to slow my speech down. I have to be prepared in a lot of cases to provide more details than I need to make a decision. I need to, with some people, ask how their family is, how they're doing, if I want to connect with them. It's very important if you can't connect with someone, you cannot communicate with them. But you have to know who they are to connect with them.
No, and you make a great point, because really communication is about it's an exchange of information between two parties for to reach a goal of mutual understanding. The knife hand is a transmitter. It's not a receiving device. So when you're screaming in somebody's face or you're saying something like, "I don't have time to explain this to you, just do it," you're not communicating. You are directing, but you're not communicating.
Right. But we come up in the military, that's how we start out. Mm-hmm. For the vast majority of people, that's the communication example they get. And some of them, that's what they take home. They take in and they take home, and it becomes who they are. We have to understand that people, the majority of people haven't moved around a lot. They haven't had 16 jobs in 8 years. They've done things one way, and they've communicated in one way, and people understand them. And so it's very important to learn how to connect with the people in the community that you're going to move into, and learn and make an effort. It takes some effort. It's not something that happens over time, and you may need to get some professional training with it because it's not something that necessarily comes naturally to everybody. But it is a skill that you can learn.
And if you have time at some point, you can explain to me how to communicate with my 14-year-old daughter. The knife hand doesn't even work. She will walk right around me while texting and talking to 3 people at the same time and not even notice I'm there. But that's for another show. The military is a team sport. Everybody has to be, or should be, a team player. Even the most capable, intelligent, best of the elite special forces operators in all the branches of service, at the very heart, the smallest organization is a team. There are no superheroes. There are no dark knights in the darkness slaying the enemy independently. So we are taught to think in terms of teams. Selfless service, us, we. If you get praise from your boss, from your manager, your sergeant major, your colonel, thank you, sir, but I have to give credit to my team. This is normal. This is expected. And if you hog the spotlight, people are going to point you out and say, there we go, Spotlight Ranger right there, trying to take all the credit for the work. But you have to make a shift when you get out, because that Fortune 500 company is not hiring Bravo Company 2nd Rangers. They're not hiring 3rd Platoon Alpha Company 1st to the 502nd. They are considering whether or not to hire you. How do you make that shift from, from we to me?
From we to me. Yeah. And that's, why we call it exactly that, changing focus, moving from we to me, because we have a tendency, you said it very, very well, that all of our praise gets deflected to our team. And so it's important to prepare. If you are in the interview process, if you are even just in the informational networking process, it's very important that you think about all the kinds of different things that you might want to talk about in an interview situation, and take time to prepare yourself and to tell stories that the listener, regardless of who they are, can connect with, that will highlight your soft skills and what you bring to their team. Because, when you get to a job interview, you are there because you can do the job. They don't waste their time if you are not technically skilled, or they don't know that they can train you with the technical skills to do the job. You are there because they're trying to see if you are a cultural fit.
There you go.
For their company or for their team. And I will tell you that you are also there to see if they are a culture fit for you. So
the interview is happening in both directions.
That's exactly right. And so it's very important to tell stories, to develop and tell interesting stories that will bring to the person who's hearing your story the soft skills that you bring personally, because you may have been a part of a team, but you may even have led the team. You can take that and turn it into a story that you can effectively tell that will highlight what you bring to an organization.
And be specific. If you generated a result and it was a result of your leadership, own it. Own the results.
Exactly. And I will tell you, I one of the things that we do at LTI is we have a speaker club, and part of the speaker club, the training is provided by John Maxwell. And in the most recent session we had, he had one of his laminated cards, and John Maxwell is known for teaching from laminated cards. And I am a firm believer that if you have some specifics that you want to be able to mention during an interview process, maybe some metrics that are important. I don't think that as an interviewer, I'm not going to judge you on whether you can remember your statistics well. I think there's nothing wrong with pulling out a card and being able to say, I thought about this ahead of time, so I wrote down the details, and being able to give those specifics that you're talking about.
And you may have let's say, for example, you go and work for a manufacturing company and they ask you something about process improvement, and they want to dig into some details there about percentages and percents of faults, or ways that you streamlined a process or improved or saved money or built efficiencies. It might help for you to have a few notes handy, especially if that's a key performance outcome that you want to highlight in your interview.
And for people that you're interviewing with who are high detailed personalities, they actually would appreciate that you cared enough to prepare ahead and to give them the right number because you had it on the card. Absolutely.
Now, and if somebody on your interview team has a master's degree in engineering, they're going to love the details. And now if they happen to be an MBA, they're probably going to want to hear about profits and losses and how that were affected. So it helps to know who's on the other side of the table.
And I will say that if a company is going to judge you on whether you have those kinds of numbers memorized, I'm not sure that's really the place for you.
Yeah. I mean, if they're looking for a computer, I'm sure they'll find one on their desk when they get back to their office.
That's exactly right.
Annie, I would love to just, carry this conversation on for the next 2 hours, because I think there's just so much experience loaded up there in your brain housing group that I'd love to just unpack all of it, but we don't have the time. Let's close out with a question, my favorite question that I ask of all my victims, of every guest I have the privilege of interviewing. If you had just 30 seconds and 30 seconds only to give just one piece of advice only to a mil spouse, a veteran job seeker, or a transitioning service member, what would that one piece of advice be?
My piece of advice would be to start now. Regardless of where you are in the process, start now and start developing that I love me, and start thinking about who you are as a person underneath the cover that everybody sees.
You heard it, folks. If you haven't started already, start now. Annie, before we take off, can you tell us a little bit about what you have going on at Leader Transition Institute and how somebody in our audience can learn more?
So we have a lot going on at LTI, and there goes my AirPod again. So I told you we'd laugh and I'd do something silly.
Absolutely.
So 10 months out of the year, we provide a 4-day transition program for currently serving service members, military spouses, veterans from any era with any kind of discharge. We've had people come through the program who've been off active duty 20 to 25 years. It's called Changing Focus, Moving from We to Me. And I believe Sean has the link, and we'll put it in the chat for you. It will take you right to the registration page. We have a cohort coming up in December, and the cohorts are already set for 2023. We spend 4 days in the virtual arena, so you can do it in your jammies. You need to be there for all 4 days, though, or we'll kick you out. We have Speaker Club, where you can learn to perfect these stories, and we also have a bunch of individual sessions that are free, coaching and training sessions, at least one every month.
Absolutely. That sounds fantastic. Annie, I want to hear more about this. We're going to have to connect afterwards and discuss a little bit further because I want some more details. It sounds like a great opportunity.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no, it's been a pleasure. Please. And hopefully at some time in the future, we can have you on again. This has been a great session, and I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Thank you.
All right, folks, and if you haven't already done so, do yourself a favor and head on over to www.recruitmilitary.com. There you will find over 400,000 job opportunities with 16,000 different employers around the world and around the corner. Recruit Military is on a mission to help veterans transitioning service members and mil spouses find meaningful employment, not just jobs. On behalf of Recruit Military and the folks that joined us today, Annie, once again, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
All right, folks, and if you care to join us next week, we'll be revisiting our return guest, Matt Warzel. He is an expert in resumes and career counseling and interview coaching. He's going to be with us back-to-back episodes, talking to us on how to take your interview skills and your resumes from good enough to absolutely fantastic. Until then, this has been Lucas Conley for Recruit Military. Good luck and Godspeed.